Senator Raleigh Heath is looking at an initiative for this November 2011 that would raise, I believe, both the sales tax from 2.9 to 3% and the state income tax from 4.63% to 5%. Economists predict it would generate an estimated, I think, $563 million annually, and that money would be allocated for K through 20, portion K through 12, and then colleges. What I also find is very interesting is when I speak to business leaders, they've been meeting for over a year and a half, and sometimes they don't invite the politicians. They invite the economists and other stakeholders to talk about how do we invest in the roads and services and clinics and mainly the universities and K through 12 schools, because workforce development is clearly one of the top 2 or 3 factors every business leader I talk to confirms as one of the largest reasons why they relocate or start up in Colorado. There's over a dozen factors, but workforce development is critical. And when we keep raising rates, whether it's 9% or more, at our 2 or 4 year places of higher education, it makes it more difficult for middle class and low income folks to attend and earn a degree. And we have to ask, what kind of society do we want to live in? I think the question is, can government become more streamlined? I've always been a big believer in reinventing government. I actually was a White House intern back in the early 90s, and I loved working on that initiative to try to squeeze more out of every dollar because taxpayers demand it. And whether it's the Toyota Lean problem, the Toyota Lean or Six Sigma or other business practices that can try to encourage savings, I think it's great. But we're going to have to not only address that issue, but the last thing I'll mention is we've cut over $5 billion over the last 4 fiscal years. Now, when I talk to long-term economists, they say that's some of the deepest cuts we've made in our state's 135-year history. And we've made tremendous cuts, whether it's eliminating the $100 million senior citizen and property tax exemption or reducing our ability to pay for K through 12. We cut our own salary a couple %. There's a lot of areas we've cut, and we're going to have to ask ourselves just what's the appropriate level of government.
One of the perspectives that I would like to see in any reform measure, and Representative McCloskey referenced Senator Heath's effort to raise taxes. One of the things that I like to talk about, and I think it's worthy of consideration, is that we do have this balanced budget requirement at the state level. And certainly it'd be nice to see that in Washington, D.C., where they can print money that effectively doesn't exist and spend more money than they take in. We can't do that at the state level. We have to balance our budget. But imagine what it would be like in your business if you developed a plan that you're going to spend intentionally 100% of every dollar you bring in. Every penny you bring in every year, you're going to spend. That's what we do. Now, is that better than deficit spending? Yes. But I don't think that Tabor is broken. I like Tabor. I like the idea that the citizens get to decide. And I like to remind people that your legislature or your school board or your town council really doesn't have the ability, the authority to raise taxes on you. We can't just do that to you. We can refer to the ballot and ask you, do you want to do this? And I think that's what Senator Heath is doing. What I'd like to see as part of that is something that goes beyond the balanced budget requirement. We probably can't do both because we have single issue or single subject, but I think unless and until your state government is required to operate on less than 100%, we will never, ever, ever have enough. And if we raise taxes and bring in $500 million more, we're going to spend it, and we won't have any left. And there will be someone in the great mix of people who come down to the legislature every year, there will be someone there saying, we don't have enough, we also need to have money for this. And that that perpetuates the reality that we will never, ever, ever have enough, and we will always, always, always be asking you to pay more. So again, unless and until government is forced to operate on less than 100%, I don't think that dynamic will change.
You know, working in and with some economic development groups in the state, one of the things that I had the privilege of doing was talking with companies who were looking at a new place to land. And one of the comments that I heard that I thought was most telling is, you know, the state of Colorado ranks pretty well Actually, you know, if you look in the national polls, the state ranks about like number 7 or something in the nation as far as tax friendliness and policy friendliness and so forth. However, the problem is you can't hover over the state. You have to land in a county and in a city. And by the time that you start adding that county and that city tax regulation environment, and you realize the full scope of where you're going to land, then you start getting the full picture. And when you look at charts that talk to you about that picture, Colorado drops considerably down to about number 23 to 25. And this is where we have to come into account. And recognize that when we talk about raising more taxes at the state level, and while the state might look like it's in a good position, that also you have to take into the city and the county and the local level as well, and what that will ultimately do to companies that are looking for a new place that they can call home and bring jobs to Colorado, because it's more than just the state that gets measured. Actually, Representative Holbert and I are working on a bill together, and he's letting me share all about that, and it goes to Representative McClosey's and concern about higher education and the rising costs of higher education. And that's another issue that I heard a lot about walking in my district. One of the reasons that Heritage schools and Littleton schools have had a declining enrollment is because people like the community. They moved here for the schools, but then they just stayed after their kids graduated, and not having any more kids. So thank goodness it's such a good school that we draw people from other districts. And so we've heard that cry, and we are looking at, and I really do believe that the 21st century will win on education innovation. It's not going to be a war that's won in the traditional sense as we have known in previous eras. And I think education innovation is going to be one of the keys of winning the 21st century and global war that we are embarking upon. So we're looking at a bill to help parents, give them another tool in the toolbox, and students to propel them into college. And I don't want to...
However much you want.
I'm not gonna show my cards too much on that, but just know that we've heard the cries from parents, and we're going to try to make a significant stride in helping kids advance to college with some help from innovative and creative ideas.
I was privileged to work with Senator Scheffel on business personal property tax exemption, reform, repeal. There are counties that rely very, very heavily, that 70, 80, 90% of their total tax revenue comes from business personal property tax. Think of mountain communities with mining, and they get very, very alarmed when we down in Douglas County, we collect something like 7 or 8% of our total revenue from business personal property tax. Our commissioners love it, the idea of repealing it or allowing a timeout. We've got a couple of different ideas. I don't know if it'll pass constitutional muster, but we're looking at allowing counties to negotiate more aggressively on business personal property tax exemptions to attract new business. That's a good thing to do. It brings companies, jobs to Colorado. But one of the requirements that I have is in any sort of repeal or exemption timeout to business personal property tax, it's got to include the people who are already in business. It's got to allow an incentive for you all to go out and do what you love to do. We had a bill last session that went to the Senate Kill Committee that would have allowed a 2-year timeout. Go buy whatever you want to buy during 2012 and 2013, and anything you buy for your business, business personal property, computers, software, desks, delivery van, whatever you might need, you would gain a permanent exemption, and the idea was that it would create an economic stimulus, pay the sales tax, I hope hire people, create more income tax, but that didn't make it out of the Senate Kill Committee, so we're back to square one. But I think to allow counties more flexibility to negotiate to keep business, incentivize businesses to grow. I like the idea of allowing you to prosper, do what you love to do, your passion, real estate, whatever else you might be involved in. And if we can come out of the end of that timeout period, that incentive period, with more companies employing more people, both of which are paying more sales tax and income tax, I think that's good for our state. And grateful to be here with you if I don't get a chance to say thank you.
This past year, my state senator, Joyce Foster, from Southeast Denver, and I each received over a dozen phone calls and emails from constituents after some recent hail damage storms where the roofs of their property were destroyed, and when they went to go to make a claim with their insurance provider dropped them. And we started to do a lot of research with consumer groups in many states, try to provide some consumer protections where if you only have 3 claims in 20 or 30 years, you can't be dropped. And I believe the Realtors Association for the state of Colorado endorsed that bill, and I'm going to work with them and all the 23,000 realtors statewide to bring that back. Secondly, I love when I get calls, again, from constituents. I had a gentleman who was part of a biker club, and he and his colleague or his friends got kicked out of a mall for wearing, black leather. And I'm a big First Amendment legislator, and I'm going to support and introduce what's called an equal access bill, that if you're going into a public place like a mall, especially if there's something called TIF, tax incremental financing that was used to help finance the construction of that mall, you should not be kicked out simply because of your attire. And they're stereotyped, and that really bothers me. A third issue, I mentioned the transmission bill. I think if we could have more competition against Excel in the construction, maintenance, and ownership of transmission lines, we can not only connect to that super wind highway in the Great Plains, but also create a lot of private sector jobs. And I'm still grappling with a major issue about how we can fund more college scholarships. I just see so many kids in my district and statewide who just can't afford to go. And we have 30 incredible higher education institutions, and just trying to figure out a way to pay for it. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the dialogue.
Most of the issues that I deal with have to do with education. I've served on the Education Committee for the 13 years that I've been in the State House. And so, again, this year I've already filed a bill that will have to do with some issues around the innovative schools concept that mostly Denver Public Schools has used. An innovative school or a school district is something like a charter school, only the charter is within their local board rather than with a state board. And we're having some issues with the teachers union with regard to whether or not a brand new school that hasn't opened yet can be opened as an innovative school, meaning that they can waive state statute, meaning that the teachers are at-will employees, meaning that collective bargaining is waived and so forth. So I think it's an important bill that we need to go back and clean up, which I carried a few years ago. It needs some help. And then I was also really encouraged by the fact that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation just gave $9.7 million to Colorado's public schools, particularly some 4 districts that will apply for this grant money to work on some teacher issues that have to do with tenure reform and with educator and principal evaluation. So that'll be good. And the other bills that I focus on very likely will have to do with education reform. So thank you very much for being such good listeners, and thank you for caring about what we do at the State House. A lot of people don't. So we appreciate it.